welcome to episode 13 of the Good Game Roundtable podcast. I'm Lin Jie Kong, and today I'm joined by production coordinator Rad Yeo.
Hey!
Production assistant Sanita Khandharixay.
G'day.
Did I say it right?
It's actually Khandharixay.
Khandharixay.
Yeah, but don't worry.
Gotta get it
I should
right.
get $1 for every time.
Yeah. Do you want $1 now? I don't have $1 now.
That's okay,
and making his Roundtable podcast debut, host of Well Played and resident professional stand-up comedian Michael Hingers Hing.
Hello, everybody.
Woo! How's everyone?
Yeah, good.
It's
I'm
really
very well.
Friday afternoon. Okay, so now this week, it's a bit of a special podcast. We're going to get a little bit angry, maybe vent a little, unleash our frustrations, and discuss some things which may make some people a little uncomfortable. We're going to talk about what it's like growing up Asian in Australia, being Asian in the media, and why representation and diversity is important. So if you care strongly that you care about none of these things, now's the time to switch off because...
No, don't switch off. Listen to this. It's
Yeah,
important.
learn something.
Shut up, idiots.
But the next hour you'll be... You know, you might be incensed by 4 Asians talking about themselves and voicing their opinions. But just so we're all clear and just so I'm covered and the ABC is covered, this podcast is entirely our own opinions. And these opinions have nothing to do with the ABC and have not been endorsed and supported by the ABC, just in case there is a Senate inquiry or there's a race war in the UK.
Yeah, can you imagine if 4 white people were doing a podcast that had to say that? Like, of course. Anyway.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's screwed up, right?
I was thinking that before. She's like, if you don't want to hear this, you know, like, don't. Like, that's our lives, okay? That's listening to white people say things that aren't necessarily relevant to us. That's our lives.
I love it. We've already started
Yeah.
now. It's
Ask
done.
your questions, Lynn.
All right. So before I ask you guys to demonstrate just how Australian you are, I like to talk a little bit about Peter Dutton, our esteemed
mate.
immigration minister. And this is
Salad
what
fingers.
he had to say on Sky News this week.
Recent published reports, 90% of Afghan refugees don't have a job. What on God's earth were these people suggesting about 50,000 people being taken from every hellhole of the world to make sure that not only do they can live in the Australian community, but prosper in it, and not just prosper by being here? Because we've had 15 years, virtually, 15 years of conflict in Afghanistan, and that has produced 90% of refugees who don't have a damn job.
Well, for many people, they won't be, numerate or literate in their own language, let alone English. And this is a difficulty because the Greens are very close to the CFMEU, as obviously the Labor Party is, and their affiliations with the union movement obviously are well known. Now, these people would be taking Australian jobs, there's no question about that. And for many of them that would be unemployed, they would languish in unemployment queues, and on Medicare and the rest of it. So there would be a huge cost, and there's no sense in sugarcoating that. That's the scenario.
I just want to say I came to Australia illiterate and innumerate, so I'm sorry that I've stolen everyone's jobs, guys. I mean, I was 6 years old, but
You've stolen their dreams.
I was your classic, economic immigrant coming here to make money, to make my life better, right?
How dare you?
How
How dare you
dare I?
try and better yourself and have a better
But there's
life?
also a fundamental, there's a fundamental discord in what he's saying, right? Which I'm obviously as an ABC employee, I'm not taking a political opinion here. I'm just saying that you can't, on one hand, argue that refugees are here to steal jobs, and then also, if they're going to be stealing jobs, they won't also be languishing in the dole queue. Like, those are two fundamentally opposed
I love that
ideas.
meme, the Schrodinger's
Immigrant?
refugee,
Yeah,
right,
Schrodinger's
or immigrant.
refugee. Yeah.
The one that's both on welfare and stealing your jobs at the same time. So this brings me to, where are you guys from?
I'm from Bankstown.
No, Rad. Where are you
I am
really from?
Bankstown.
So tell me a bit about your childhoods. Where are your parents from? Michael, obviously, your family goes back decades in Australia.
Decades, yeah.
Well,
almost
not decades,
centuries.
sorry, centuries. I meant centuries.
So for people who can't see my face right now, who haven't seen me on the show, I look pretty Chinese. My family's, I grew up in the Sutherland Shire in Sydney.
Shire.
Yeah, it's sick.
Oh, mate.
My family, though, are from, going back a couple of generations, are from places like Walgett, Thursday Island, Lightning Ridge, and Kingsgrove. Oh, in Kensington. We were Market Gardens in Kensington. We came out from China and then left Sydney to go to the Gold Rush. But yeah, I grew up in Australia. I don't speak Chinese. I just...
You just look Chinese.
Look at... Yeah, it's...
So, like, what... When did your family actually move to Australia from China?
I don't know exactly. We don't have records of them really arriving here, except for oral histories. We know that portions of them left Kensington in like 1850 to go to the Gold Rush. So we were here for like at least 170 years or something. Interestingly, though, one thing we do know is that my last name isn't actually really Hing, because Chinese people put their first name last and their last name first, or the family name, etc.
Yeah.
Switching around. That was some dude's first name.
So you've possibly lost your last name.
Well, no, because his name was Zheng Hing.
Oh, okay, right.
So I'm just another Zheng, another
You're
Chung, another Chung.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Another Chinese boy.
Yeah. And so, our actual last name is Zheng, but they were like, I know how this works. And this is like, I mean, you have some sympathy for these guys because they're port authorities in like 1840, right? They're not going to know necessarily the minutiae of
I mean, you're
Chinese
lucky
family names.
you weren't given the name Smith or something.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, well, my great-grandmother...
Michael Smith.
My great-grandmother's... her last name was Yakman or something, some sort of Chinese last name. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it was renamed Jackman.
Yeah.
So my mother's mother is all... her family's are all Jackmans, yeah.
Related to Hugh?
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
I can tell.
They just look slightly different to you. Rad.
Yes.
Where's your family from?
My family is from Singapore, so both of my parents were born there, grew up there. Then my father's family moved to Australia when he was kind of like college age, because I have an aunt on that side who is mentally disabled, and my uncle on that side as well wasn't doing too well in school, and Singapore is extremely competitive, so their family came over here to give those kids a better chance.
Wait, is the situation... I'm curious as to know if the situation there is that they thought school was easier in Australia or they thought the quality of life was easier in Australia. So when you say give someone a better chance, right?
Both. Yeah,
right, okay.
So number one, school is easier if you're behind.
Yeah.
Singapore, it's just like, well, you're behind, bye, bitch.
That's like most Asian countries.
Yeah.
The rest.
Yeah, it's just like, nah, you're not catching up. And also for my mentally handicapped aunt, there was just better infrastructure.
More social services.
Yeah,
type thing.
exactly. So that's the reason why they moved. And then my dad stayed in Singapore for a while, and then he eventually moved. And then when my mum married him, she moved here as well. So they chose to live in Australia rather than Singapore for me and my sisters.
Were you born here or were you born in Singapore?
I was born here. I've only been to Singapore once. And I could tell all sorts of stories about diaspora, but I'm sure we'll leave that for later.
We'll get to that.
But Australian born and raised.
Do you speak any other languages?
No, I know a couple words in Malay and Hokkien, because I don't know if you know this, but in Singapore they speak Singlish, which is this amalgamation of Malay, Hokkien, Chinese, English, and it's beautiful, but it's also a mess. And so there's a lot of words that I sometimes forget aren't English that I want to use. But I don't speak another language. I just have words here and there.
And they add la to the end of everything.
I was about to try and do a Singaporean accent, but I know I can't do it.
Just do it.
It's so hard. It's so hard.
This is the right stage to do it.
It's so hard. But one thing I love is whenever I hear a Singaporean accent, like I know it, and you feel that sense of like camaraderie. So I used to work in a tea shop, and I once had some customers who were Singaporean, and like I was serving her, and she was, just quite standoffish, and then I said, "Oh, are you from Singapore?" Because I recognise the accent, and immediately she turned into an auntie. She was like asking me about my studies and asking where my parents were from, and like just like, "Oh, you're studying hard. What do you want to do in the future?" and stuff like that. Just warmed up completely. I think that's really funny.
And we will talk about diaspora, but
Yes,
I go traveling, and if I hear like an old Chinese lady singing in Chinese in Germany of all places, I will be crying in the corner. Like, that's me. Sanita, tell us about you and your family.
I'm from the backwoods of Sydney, also known as Campbelltown.
Down my way.
Yeah, down that way. No, actually, my mother is... I get this a lot. So my mother is from Thailand. My dad is from Laos. And then everyone goes, what's that? So I get it constantly because most people don't know where Laos is.
They should look on a map.
Yeah. So, so I was born here. They came over here. I was born here with my sister. My father and his 2 children from a previous relationship were from overseas. They were actually from refugee camps as well. And then I grew up in Canberra town with a strong Buddhist upbringing. So, you guys would get very angry, but I'm very, very calm. I'll have a lot of complaints, of course, but I'm very calm because of my Buddhist upbringing.
But you will, bring them across in a calm fashion.
What's your language situation?
So my mother is from northeast Thailand, which is the backwoods of Thailand, which is next to Laos. So we have a different dialect, which is called Thai Isan, which is completely different to the Thai that you speak in Bangkok.
Right.
So it's a very similar language to Lao. So it's almost like picking up another language. So I've got to know Thai, I've got to know Lao, then I've got to know my mother's dialect.
Right.
And then on top of that, learn English because they wanted me to be good at English.
Were you born in Australia?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
So you have 4 languages, yeah?
Yeah, and then the other ones I studied as
You're
well.
all right, mate.
Yeah. But
Look at you and me, Rad, just 2 idiots over here.
English barely.
the tricky thing was, I go to school here because my parents want me to do really, really, really well. So I'm like, okay, I've got to fit in. I've got to really get good at English. I'm going to answer all their phone calls, answer the door, and speak really good English. Then I get over there, and it's like, I'm so embarrassed because I can't get the accent right, when I'm speaking. So it's like, oh, what have I lost? In a way.
Oh, I've been told off by enough people in Chinatown about my Chinese, and it's not even that bad. They just can't deal with it.
The one interesting thing that I saw on King of the Hill the other day, this is which is really, really funny because there's a Lao character.
Yeah, right.
And one of Hank's friends
I watched that clip,
said, so are you Chinese or Japanese? And the guy's like, I've lived in California for about 20 years. I'm actually from Laos. And then the guy's like, oh, where? And he's like, I'm Lao. I'm Laotian. And his friend's just like, the ocean? And he's like, no. He's like, Laos, it's a landlocked country between Vietnam and Thailand. And he's like, there's a couple of million people there. And the guy's like, so you Chinese or Japanese? I get that all the time.
Yeah.
People just don't know where Laos is.
Do your parents share a dialect or a language?
Yeah. So they share what my mother has, which is the Thai Sang, which is just like the border. Yeah. The backwoods Thai.
I love getting into the nitty gritty of it as well because my family is Peranakan, which is a subculture as well. And if you say to someone, I'm Peranakan, they're just like, what? like there's no and to be fair, Peranakan is a very, very small subculture, but it's interesting how I as well I'll filter myself a lot of the time and I'll say just Singapore because I know that people know that. But really what I would say that my family is and what I would identify with is Peranakan.
Yeah. See, I would just say just Thai.
Just Thai. It's just easier.
Yeah.
Were your parents refugees? Or?
My father was and my brothers were. So my brothers were actually born in a refugee camp. And they were actually they're from Laos. They were born but my brothers, they were in a refugee camp crossing the border to Thailand. And that's where they were born. And then they made the decision to come over to Australia, which is a really unusual thing because most of my father's relatives are all in America. And then for some reason my father chose to come to Australia. So
it is the better country. So I guess with your background, when you hear those words said by Peter Dutton, does that hit you even harder? I mean, the rest of us, our families don't come from this refugee background, but does that hit a certain point with you?
Yeah, it's very hard because our family comes here to give their children, us, a better life, better access to resources and whatnot, and they're doing so much for us. They have no connections when they come here, and you guys we grow up not knowing anyone. We don't have that uncle who could get us an internship at ABC kind of thing. We literally have to slug it out ourselves to get here, The most that they can do is be like, hey, you want to come work at a restaurant? And it's like,
yeah. Do you want to come clean houses with me? Yeah, sure, Mum and Dad. I got nothing better to do in my school holidays anyway.
As a very, very quick digression, I got into an Uber the other night and it was a young guy And I think we just asked the Uber driver, "Hey,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Tell me
What-
about yourself."
What are you blah blah blah?" And he was like, "Well, I work in PR," and I'm like, "Oh, cool, like whatever,
Yeah.
And then he was like, and I was like, "Oh, what firm?" Like, I don't know any PR firms, but I thought maybe I could just make conversation. And he goes, "Oh, well, you wouldn't know. It's my father's firm." And I was like, "Oh, cool." And he's like, "Yeah." And then I got the sense very very quickly that he was like a guy who just kind of come out of. He said he got out of uni, worked a couple of jobs, but then went to dad's firm to work there, and then. You get the striking thing of like, wow, I could never have gone to just worked at my dad's firm. My dad doesn't have a firm I could work. Yeah. And then I was like, chatting to him more, and I was like, so what are you up to? Blah blah blah. And he goes, well, I'm just. I asked him why he was driving Ubers, and he said, he's like, oh well, I don't really need the money, but I'm just trying to save up because I'm about to go to Yacht Week in the Greek islands. I thought Yacht Week was like Fashion Week or whatever, where you go to just check out yachts. Apparently, it's just a holiday for a week. And I'm like, what is your life like? You go to Yacht Week, working for your dad's. Oh, God.
I'm just working for my dad. I'm just driving.
To be honest, though, that's not entirely like race based.
No, that's not a race.
It's very much privilege
absolutely.
based.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's not a race thing. That was just when we were talking about like connections you could get.
Absolutely.
I just remember thinking like, what am I like? What my
This is what we're missing out on. Yacht Week.
My uncle's like an orderly in a hospital, like, and he's doing well for himself, but like. I can get an internship cleaning bedpans if you want. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't. Yeah.
Well, I have flipped burgers. Like, my parents run a fish and chip shop, and
Oh, really? Where at?
Mossman.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Oh.
you know,
Do you want to plug
just
the fish
freaking
and
it
chip
up.
shop?
Yeah, just
No plugs, ABC. No plugs.
Oh yeah, shit. No, that would be nepotism the other way around. Anyway, well, for me, I'm the freshest off the boat out of all
Yeah,
of y'all.
you are.
know?
How old were you when you came out?
I was 6.
She said that earlier if you'd been paying attention.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, but he was on his phone. It's
fine.
okay.
I was emailing.
Look,
It's not
it's
important.
fine.
I was emailing you, Lynn.
I was literally plopped on a plane as a 6-year-old by myself because my parents couldn't come back to Shanghai to come pick me up because they were essentially under this amnesty thing. So this is post Tiananmen Square. This is like... I came in 92, they came to Australia in 89, and they had to stay in Australia for like 4 years. They couldn't leave the country.
Oh, but
And
you
so-
were back in.
But I was left under the care of my grandparents. So I actually didn't see my parents for like 2.5 years.
That's intense.
And then I was put on a plane by myself at 6. So I think my parents obviously, saw a sense of kind of, I guess, potential in me.
Do you remember getting on that plane?
Oh, yeah. I remember the whole plane trip. Like,
So-
I remember transiting in Hong Kong.
So so that means you hadn't seen your parents really since you were 3.5-ish?
So my
3?
dad left Shanghai. So I was born in Shanghai. My parents are born in Shanghai. But Shanghai being like other immigrant cities like New York, London, Singapore, everyone else came from provinces. So my grandparents came to Shanghai from their respective provinces. They met. They had my parents in Shanghai. I was born in Shanghai. And then my dad left for Sydney when I was 3.5. And then my mum left for Sydney when I was 4.
Right,
And
okay.
then I didn't see them again until I was 6.
Now, I'm just thinking, I don't remember a lot from when I was like 4 or 3, just like fleeting glimpses.
Yeah.
So when you arrived in Sydney then, did you even recognise your parents? Did you know who they were?
Well, obviously because they were like the only Asian couple in the airport at that point in
They
time.
saw you and started crying, and you're like,
Yeah.
maybe.
And then I remember I was
Wrong parents.
because the flight attendants had to look after me, so obviously
Sure.
they had to help me transit through Hong Kong because back then there weren't direct flights from Shanghai to Sydney. You had to transit through Hong Kong. I remember the very nice man who sat next to me on the way from Shanghai to Hong Kong. He helped me open my meal. He was very nice. And then I sat next to a Taiwanese family on my way from Hong Kong to Sydney who actually spoke Mandarin. And at this point in time, I had no understanding of English, couldn't speak a word of English.
I don't think if I was like a 6-year-old, I don't think I would know that Taiwan's a country. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How would that's
Probably
amazing
just
to me.
told
that,
her.
Oh, maybe
I think they just told me they were Taiwanese
Yeah,
because I was like, where are you guys from? You guys speak Chinese? And they're
Right.
like, oh, we're from Taiwan. I don't know. Like, I think at 6, I don't think Taiwan would have meant anything to me. But
Yeah,
I
yeah,
must
yeah.
have relayed it to my parents
And
at
then
some stage.
Yeah.
And so I got dropped off at Sydney Airport and the flight attendant carried me out. I was tiny and my parents like, yay, our daughter's here. Yay, our only child, our golden child. Now I'm
they
not
had
the
to have
only
your
child.
brother.
And then they had my brother later. But yeah, so that was a really, really interesting experience. Like I am a first generation migrant. I literally came off a plane without a word of English. Like
And your English is so good.
I know.
man.
It's pretty good, isn't it? I think I've got a pretty good Australian
really
accent going on. You know, I've done well for myself.
So, do your parents? I don't know what the term is, but do your parents count as quote unquote refugees then? As
No.
refugees?
They are purely economic immigrants,
Right, okay.
but they got to stay because of what happened in China. And to be honest, you know, they were part of that wave. You know, no one knew in the 80s that China would turn out to be China right now. Like, no one had an inkling that it would be a global economic superpower.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, my parents felt trapped. My parents were living with my dad's parents and my aunt. It was like 8 people in a 2-bedroom apartment without a living room.
Yep.
And my mum, and you can buy apartments. You were given apartments by the communist government. And if they deemed that you had enough square meters to live in, you couldn't get any other space. So for my mother, you know, she was like, she was 27 when she married my dad. She was 28 when she had me. And then she would have felt so trapped. And both my parents were professionals.
Yeah.
You know, my dad was like a highly regarded electrical engineer. Mum was like manager of a factory with like 2,000 people. But they felt so trapped. And at that time, my uncle was in Sydney already. And so they just made that decision like, okay, we need to leave. And I think, you know, a lot of countries gave students at that time, you know, they came as students, they came as English students. They gave students that amnesty post, you know, what happened at Tiananmen Square and stuff.
So does that mean your dad came out and your dad and your mum came out and then began life as an engineer and a factory worker in Australia, or did they immediately sort of work in?
Holy crap!
Yeah, I think that's
hire 'em,
I think that's a really interesting
like,
point, right? Because we talk about how like people come from refugee backgrounds or immigrant backgrounds, they arrive in Australia and they aren't able to continue the life they left behind. And I think we kind of just joke about it as like, I'm a doctor in Portugal, whatever the joke is.
Yeah.
But you know, this is an actual thing that happens to parents, right?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, maybe similarly, Rad and Sanita, maybe with your parents as well. Like, my parents didn't understand a word of English. You know, they had maybe 6 months to a year of English tuition in Australia, but they had to make a living. So Dad was working in a scuba engineering company in Brookvale because he was an engineer. So he was making scuba diving meters. And then Mum started off in a nut shop, shops where they sell nuts and like candied almonds and all that stuff.
Yum.
Didn't understand a word of English. And I don't know how she managed to sell people stuff without understanding English. Like, that to me is like, I don't know how you guys did it. But then once after that job, Mum actually started cleaning, as, you know, she was a cleaner in high school. She was a cleaner at the local boys' high. And my dad then started being a cleaner at TAFE because the shifts for cleaners were actually really good. Like, you do a really early morning shift from like 5:30 to about 8:30, and then you do an afternoon shift from about 4 to 6. And then so they could look after me in the middle. And then obviously Dad would go to work in the middle as well. And then they were like, oh, you know, cleaning's actually pretty good. And then they started their own cleaning business.
Right.
And so they were like cleaning rich people's houses for like 10 years or something. And that for them, it was like, oh, we're self-employed and this is like pretty good money.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, no one's going to like question our credentials, but here they are, you know, 2 university educated, like middle class people cleaning rich people's homes. But that's what immigrants do.
I was going to say that's the immigrant story.
That's the immigrant
It's
story,
like,
right?
You do what needs to be done, and it's not like, oh, but I'm too good for this job. It's like, no, I have to provide. I need a job.
Yeah.
I work hard. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what about like your parents? Like, did they?
So
have similar issues?
My dad was in the army prior to coming to Australia. That was actually why he stayed in Singapore, because they have national service in Singapore. So he was in the army for a number of years. And he has told me several times what rank he got up to, but I never remember. And he did army intelligence for a little while.
Your father was the president of Singapore.
Prime Minister?
Sorry, I apologize.
And he met the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister gave him a sword.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Now, is this in an official ceremony, or are they just fencing buddies?
By gave him a sword, I actually mean he stabbed my father. That my father pulled the... No, that's not true. I just made that up. So then my dad came here and he started working in IT, and he did that for a number of years. I think he studied here as well, and my mum was a lawyer in Singapore, and she came here and she practiced law for a little while. But then my parents had my eldest sister, and both of them stopped working for 7 years to raise us. I have no idea how that is
pretty amazing for Asian parents to do that, though.
Yeah.
Like, that is incredible.
As an outsider, that reeks of criminal enterprise.
What were they really doing, Rad? What were they really doing?
Look, honestly, I think they just lived really, really, really simply. Like, growing up, we never had fancy things. We never had new things. And that was it. Like, they weren't concerned with having things. They were just concerned with having a family. So I know that when they moved to our house, they didn't have any curtains. They didn't have any furniture and stuff like that. So they actually put up newspaper in the windows, which turns out was a really bad idea because it makes the house look abandoned and people broke in.
Again, criminal enterprise. This is all pointing towards a meth lab.
Yeah. They decided to not buy curtains because it seemed like a waste of money. And
Is your real name actually Rad?
it's not. Rad is a nickname. So yeah. And then eventually my dad started work again, and he found it really hard because he'd been out of the tech game for so long. And my mum worked part-time for a little bit here and there, doing mostly receptionist work and things like that. But yeah.
Sanita, how about your parents?
We were really, really poor. Really, so
I love poor stories because I grew up like so poor.
my father.
No, I'd said like nothing the whole time you were talking because I was just like, tell me more.
Tell me
About your life.
Tell me more.
Yeah.
So I could do an entire podcast about my life. You know, I'm writing a book, maybe
A memoir.
A memoir.
So my father was working a factory job, but my mother didn't know any English, didn't speak a word of English. It was really hard for her because she was just raising 2 kids on her own, plus my father's children. And they were around, I think they were been near their 20s when she was raising them. So she's raising 2 little young girls and then teenage boys at the same time. So she's just like, bam, mother already. Like, she's got to learn the entire lifespan of these children.
Real quick.
Yeah. And so my father, he's trying to do his best to make a living for us. And
do you know what the factory was?
Pirelli cables.
Oh, he's making cabling.
Yes, he was cabling, but he had a couple of issues of his own at the time. So my mother was often feeling quite neglected. You know, she doesn't really know how to speak English. She couldn't really take us out anywhere. Yeah. And I think that's why.
And there's no immediate family in Australia for her.
No.
Yeah, so that would have been really hard.
Yes. So she has no relatives here until maybe about 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Her niece came over. So.
Oh, wow.
Yes, on my father's side, he had in-laws. So they were actually my half brother's auntie and uncle. So they were the only relatives that we had.
From like a previous relationship.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So, and it's hard because it's strange thinking about how much I loved video gaming and how much I wanted it when I was a kid, but not having money for it. You know? It was only until my brother was working he was the one buying consoles, and that's how we grew up on it.
Yeah.
But it was just mega, really difficult.
It's insanely difficult because only my immediate family is here as well. So that's it, and that's who you have to support you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's it. I've got a unit of 4, and then that's it. There's no extended family. Everyone else is in China or whatever. Michael, I want to know about your parents.
Oh, well, I'm going to sound like a real snooty loser now after your actual, genuinely heroic stories. So I am. Let me say at the start of this, I am the end result of the immigration process. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you are what our kids or grandkids will aspire to.
So my family for decades was very, very poor. You know, we were criminals and bookmakers.
Is that why you think my family's criminals? Because yours wasn't. You're trying to deflect.
Yeah, basically. No, I mean, so there are like thieves. Like there are thieves and bookmakers and insurance fraudsters. Like
book cookers.
Yeah.
I thought you meant
opium
actually
dens
bookmakers.
at some stage.
Yeah, man. There's some drug stuff back in the day.
Poppy fields.
Yeah, it's all that kind of real dodgy stuff. And then about 80 years ago, or about 75 years ago, we got semi-legit with a furniture factory on my dad's side. And then that actually would have been 90 years ago, because that was when my grandfather grew up on my dad's side, grew up in a furniture factory, but they lost everything in the Depression. And then he was in the army for a bit. So, my dad grew up pretty poor, so did my mum. They grew up, my mum's dad was a librarian, but like kind of at UNSW, and he was the first person in his family to graduate from uni. His wife, so one of those real funny things where it's like she was from country New South Wales, and was like by some margin like the smartest person in her class, but because her dad was like an old sexist Chinese dude, he's like, she won't go past year 10 kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
Took her out of school. Yeah. And so she then didn't have an education, despite the fact that she's like super bright, and the headmaster. Well, this is the story my grandmother told us. So the headmaster went to her dad and like begged her to let us keep her in school, because he was like, yeah, like this young woman, your daughter's really smart, and then just take her out, because women aren't meant to go to school, old school Chinese dude. And so my maternal grandmother just kind of never really worked, raised her 2 kids and stuff. So then what that kind of like struggle breeds hardworking children, obviously. So
absolutely, yeah.
In the of the 4 people in that generation in my family, of my parents' generation, 3 of them are doctors. So they're all like, they worked really hard. And then as a result, their children, specifically me, are privileged, lazy shithead. Like just the worst.
But then again, your older brother's a doctor.
No, my older brother is a software engineer.
Oh, okay. Right.
He works in a corporate job.
Yeah.
And you wear track pants to work.
Look, I fully acknowledge this, all right? Like, I acknowledge that I had this incredible privilege. Like, I wouldn't be able to do. Like, I understand that. Like, I'm thankful, very thankful. Like, I get to do comedy and play video games and.
But the thing is that
music,
the reasons why, like, our parents came to Australia and why we came to Australia is so eventually generations down the track, kids would be able to do that. Well, they have the option to do that.
Totally.
That's the thing.
I don't feel. I mean, obviously, you feel an amount of middle class guilt about it, definitively, because I had incredible privileges growing up that I did nothing to gain. I did absolutely. I was born into a family with luck. That's what it is, right? And then I have squandered that privilege.
You have entertained and
literally dozens of people have
made many people laugh. Okay,
anyway.
So speaking about growing up, what was like growing up Asian in Australia? I mean, Michael and I, you and I are similar age. Sanita and Rad, you're about like 5 years younger than we are. What was it like growing up Asian in Australia?
I went to primary school in the Shire. Did you go to school in the Shire?
Yeah, man. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Sutherland Shire Christian School for a year, or like half a year. I was.
That sounds like the widest school ever. Sutherland Shire Christian School.
Okay, here's the thing. My family, so me, my 2 sisters, and then I think another family of 2 other kids were the only ethnics in this K-12 school. Like, I'm not even kidding. It's just like white everywhere. And when you're a kid, you don't know that you're different until someone tells you.
Yeah.
So like I honestly didn't know I was different until people would start pointing it out, and it's just in the smallest things. It's like, your hair's black. Yep. Like,
and?
Sure.
Got anything else?
Yeah, and it would be things like they would make. It sounds so stupid because we're adults now, but they would make fun of the color of my skin, like literally just like, you're odd because your skin is that color. And you don't know how to deal with that as a kid. So that was really, it was odd and it was rough. And I ended up leaving that school for academic reasons, actually, because I was reading at their grade 3 level.
You were too smart for that school.
And they were not interested in accelerating me. So I ended up moving because
you were reading at grade 3 level, but you were mathsing at like a
high school level.
Oh, right. Yeah, right. Okay.
No.
I was saying it was a real dumber. You were going for the smart one.
Maths is not my
I was going for the stereotype.
Yeah, I was like, bring on the 4U. So I ended up going to a public school and then, thriving there in a more ethnically diverse Picnic Point public school.
Is that where you grew up in the in that sort of Blakehurst kind of area?
Yeah, so I live near Picnic Point.
Yeah,
and I now as an adult, I think about it. I think that was such a fantastic school, and how big a difference that makes. Like, it's little things like I was really interested in the human body and genetics and stuff like that. And I had my teacher talk to the teacher of like the OC class, which was the class you have to do a test to get into, when I was in year 3 or 4, and be like, she's really interested in this stuff. I know you have a guy from CSIRO coming in to talk to your class about genetics. Can she come sit in? And then she's like, yeah, that's fine. Then they just come to me and they're like, oh, do you want to go to this thing? And I'm like, I don't know what it is. And they're like, no, you should go. And I'm like, okay. So they get the teacher to bring me over when the guy's there, and I just sat and learnt about genetics, and I loved it. And I was like, this is amazing. And I have no idea how they picked up on that, or how that was something that they knew to give me, but I thrived.
Yeah, sounds like a cool place.
Yeah.
Sanita?
Primary school was not too bad for me. You know, well, I was quite shy and aloof as a kid. You know, again with my Buddhist upbringing, repressed emotions and such. So like, I get there and I'm like, Mama, don't leave me. She's left me, and I'm like, oh God, no! Like, what do I do? No Buddha to save me right now. And then I just see another Asian young Asian woman, and I was like, well, we're going to be friends.
You're mine now.
So I was friends with a lovely, I think she was like Cantonese girl, and then I befriended a nice Polynesian boy, and we were just like the ethnic group.
Yeah.
Because it was just, we just knew how to connect with each other. I guess
Because you were different.
Yeah.
Like, you understand that even as a kid.
But
You have different rules.
it's a multi-directional thing. It's not just that you identify with these people. It's also that there are people who are actively rejecting you because you're different, right?
Yeah.
So for example, a lot of my friends growing up, we stuck together as like the very few Asians in the Shire, right? It's like me and my friend Justin, my friend Adrian, and we were all super tight. Not just because I was like, hey, you know, you go to Chinese school, I go to Chinese school, whatever. But it's also just like, oh, the other kids literally won't play with us.
Yeah.
And then the other kids' parents won't let me go over to their house. And that's why I'm friends with, like, that's one of the many reasons I'm friends with you, you know? Yeah.
That's probably, that's
and,
exactly it.
And like everything that you do and have and are is just seen as like comical and interesting, but for the wrong reasons. And like we had moments where like, so you guys know kana? I don't know different dialects. So like dried plum. Yeah. So like, I don't know. My family calls it kana, and we would have all different types of kana, and it's like preserved plums, and it's like a sweet.
I think champion is what. I'm probably saying that wrong. I'm looking at you, Lin, because you speak more Chinese than I do.
Yeah, but I've got it's you know, said differently in different dialects.
Well, I know, but
And there's like 1,000 different
you
names.
speak 8 languages, don't you?
No, I think
That's Sanita.
speaks like 8 languages. I speak 2 and 1 dialect.
Right, okay.
But it's like all these foods are like proliferated as a joke, and literally like they're like, it looks like poo, and that's funny and stuff like that.
Well, it's that. Have you guys watched Fresh Off the Boat?
Yes.
The ABC show from the US?
I was skeptical about it, so I have not watched it yet.
Oh, okay. I actually think it's really good.
It's
I mean,
not perfect, but it's good.
A lot of what I experienced as a kid comes up on the show, and I remember, you know, first day of school, my lovely parents packed me like leftovers from dinner and like some nice stir fry, some good rice, some real like gourmet shit, right?
Yeah.
I get to school. Obviously, couldn't even speak a word of English. Open up my lunch, and the kid's like, "Oh, what's that? That smells."
Yeah.
Didn't eat it. Went back home and went, Mom, Dad, I think I just want a sandwich now. And honestly, I think back now, and I want to cry because I missed out on so many years of amazing Chinese food that I could have eaten during lunch. And
You're literally
instead,
trading it for white bread, man.
I'm literally traded it in for like peanut butter sandwiches and like ham sandwiches. Like that is
Brutal.
And,
that
like,
is fucked up.
And did you read that thing I sent you about how food is political?
Yeah,
as well. Like this is something that you don't know and you don't get as a kid, but like now it makes me so angry
because that's basically taking your
yeah.
culture away from you. It's basically saying, you know,
what you have
that's
is unacceptable.
illegitimate.
It's the same thing of like, oh, you can't eat with your hands, like that's dirty, that's gross. Like this is how we do things. It's like, no, that is one way of doing things. That might be your way of doing things, fine, but I have my own way of doing things, and that's awesome as well. That's acceptable as well. Like
the crazy thing is, like 25 years later now, you know, post MasterChef, post explosion of like ethnic foods in Australia, like I would have been the most popular kid in year 1 at North Sydney demonstration school.
But ethnic foods are still cheaper than Western foods because ethnic foods aren't seen as gourmet. They're seen as street foods. They're seen as cheap. They're seen as dirty and quick and more disposable, and you should be getting more bang for your buck with ethnic foods. Whereas with Western foods, you get this tiny little piece of shit serving that they put on a giant plate.
Unless it's fusion Asian.
Unless it's fusion.
Unless it's like, Billy Kwan fusion Asian, right?
And that...
Michael, tell us about your childhood.
Oh, I was just going to say two things. Number one, this explosion of like international cuisine that we're kind of going through this like in Australia. I think maybe this is a weird political point to make, but I reckon that it's weird how that is a way for people who aren't white to get in with white people now is through food. It's like a non-threatening way.
You mean get in with ethnic people?
No, the opposite way is to...
So, for example, like... obviously,
you said white people get in with white people.
No, ethnics getting...
right.
People of colour getting in with white people, sorry.
Yeah.
It's a way to do it because and I'm not talking about anyone in specific here, but I just mean like, the fact that I know the best dumpling places in Chinatown, etc.
Oh man, I bring this up all the time. Like Nick was saying it the other day. It's like, if I want to get like a good dumpling, suggestion, I'll come to you.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that because I'm not offended if someone asks me that because I've spent a lot of time researching this. I know the best places.
And it's not Din Tai Fung people. It's not Din Tai Fung.
Is it because you care, or is it because that is the identity that has been placed upon you because of how you look?
It's all. I'm sure it's everything. But my point is that you look at the people who win MasterChef, and it's just a way that like broad Australia is able to like stomach, no pun intended, like ethnic people, right? Is they're like, oh well, I'm not racist. I love Chinese food.
No, absolutely, I agree. And this, we'll talk about media representation as well. But it almost seems like in Australia, like we allow you ethnics to be on TV as long as you cook.
As long as you cook,
like that's fine, man.
Totally.
Like we don't really want to see you in any other areas outside of the kitchen.
It's
just
cooking
stay
and gaming.
in the
It's cooking and gaming.
kitchen, right?
That's true. It's cooking and gaming.
Stay in your box.
Second thing.
Yes, sorry. And the other thing I feel like I cut off Sanita before when I was talking about. When I was saying about the directional way people reject it, and I just wanted to apologise. I felt like I wanted to say the thing, and then I jumped in, and I didn't. And then when I went to apologise again, I didn't want to
just
cut
get
it
it
off
out
again. So I'm sorry. Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, Sanita.
It's okay. It's okay.
She's Buddhist. She doesn't care.
Chill.
I told you. Cut me off, Michael. I will cut you.
Repressed emotions.
My childhood, I grew up in the Shire, so, like I said, one of maybe 3-4 Asian families in the local area, if that. So one of maybe 3 Asian kids in my grade, I think. Man, I got teased a lot. I got brutalised, but that's like, whatever.
Why did your parents move to the Shire?
I don't know. I think it was. I think when
to
they
torture you specifically.
I think when they moved there, I think it was super cheap, and that's all I could afford.
But the thing is that them growing up, like Sydney wouldn't have had the ethnic enclaves that we would be used to now, right?
Not really. Certainly, they didn't have like Chatswood, like or Hurstville
or
kind of
Hurstville.
thing.
It's they couldn't move to Eastwood.
Yeah. They both grew up in Kingsgrove, right?
Yeah.
So and their parents had moved from Walgett and Thursday Island, respectively, type thing. But. Yeah, man, growing up, it was weird. I had parents, like I think I already touched on this, but I had parents of friends tell me I wasn't allowed over because,
Holy shit, really?
Yeah, because it's the Shire, dude.
Oh, man.
I got told here's an example of a thing. I had I was in a class in year 2 that had 2 teachers. So it was a 2-3 composite class, a year 2, year 3 composite class, and we also had 2 teachers in the room who rotated through. And one of the teachers for Chinese New Year, the year 3s, I was in year 2, the year 3s were doing a project on Chinese New Year, and for they were going to do a presentation in assembly where they were going to talk about like Chinese New Year and it's an exciting bird, racial diversity, whatever, multiculturalism. That was a big thing in the early 90s, right? Yeah. And for that, one of the teachers, whose name I won't say, wanted to dress me up literally in like a silk.
No, oh my gosh,
I was thinking that maybe you were going to say that, but I was like, no, that's too ridiculous.
And they had the hat.
No, oh
and the whole thing was they were like, and
dance, monkey, dance.
Yeah, hey, you guys bloody love Chinese New Year, don't you? Well, we've got one right here. And because
here's one we prepared earlier.
I was in year 2. I didn't fucking know anything, so I was like, stage time, I bloody love, a little show-offy kid, right? So I was like, I'd love to do that. And then this is one of the first times I ever really reflected on like quote unquote race and ethnicity, I guess, because the other teacher said to me like, no, Michael, I don't think that's a really smart thing for you to do. She was like, look, it's going to make you. She was like, do you think of yourself as Chinese? And I was like, I don't know. She said, well, you don't speak Chinese and you should think of yourself as Australian. You don't really celebrate Chinese New Year. And I'm like, we now do, but back then we didn't really. But and then they got into a really big discussion about it, and that was, I think, the first time I'd heard the phrase "political correctness gone mad." 1992, Illong Public School.
1992. We have to hurry up on our backgrounds. Like, we could be here talking about this for hours and hours. We have so many stories. Just before I move on to the media side of things, did you guys ever grow up with this kind of split identity thing of like, I am Asian at home, I am white at school? Okay, let's talk about this because I've suffered like with this for so much of my life.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw a word out there. If you haven't heard of it, look it up. It's called diaspora. It is the feeling of disbelonging, I suppose. And it's something that anyone who is living in a place where there's a certain look to a person that they do not fit in with experiences. So, for example, I was born in Australia. I am 100% Australian. I don't know any other country. There is no other country that I could even remotely call home, really. And I still get asked things like, no, where are you really from? I am still looked upon as someone who does not belong to Australia. It doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter how I present myself. It doesn't matter what I say to people. I am still looked upon by others as someone who does not belong in this space.
The interesting, sorry.
No, you're right. I just get on rants, and not only that, but because my family is from Singapore, I feel this really weird connection to Singapore, even though I don't know shit about the place.
How many times have you been there? Once.
You say? Yeah. I was there once when I was like 8 years old, and all I remember is complaining because it's really hot, and then I stubbed my toe.
But you know the thing about diaspora. I can't pronounce it.
I mispronounce everything.
Diaspora. Is that if you go back to Singapore, you don't feel Singaporean.
Exactly.
They don't see you as Singaporean. So you're
don't
just
belong
like
anywhere.
caught in the middle of the ocean between like two cultures and two countries where you basically have a passport to one.
Yeah.
At least I only have a passport to one. This one. And you feel like you're neither there or here. And my biggest issue was growing up because obviously I came without a word of English, and the most important thing was like learn English well, assimilate. Make sure that you don't put a foot wrong.
Doesn't matter how good your English is.
You just integrate into it. And then once I kind of got to my mid-20s, I just went, shit, no, it doesn't work like that. No matter how well I integrate and assimilate, people still look at my face and they go, you're Asian.
Yeah, you're Asian.
You're not Australian.
Always be Asian.
And you'll always be Asian.
Thus you don't belong.
Yeah.
What a rough world.
So zen.
I know.
And
There you go. Sanita, Michael, do you guys have stuff to add?
Like how I said, like my mother didn't speak a lick of English. So she really wanted me to be really good at English and just try to fit in. I've been to Thailand and Laos like maybe more than 5 times. So trying to fit in here, I thought, okay, well, I'm just gonna be really good at English, and I'm just gonna abandon my ability to speak Thai or Lao.
Yeah. Man, so many kids from immigrant backgrounds do that.
When I was 7, maybe.
Yeah.
I must have hurt my mother. Like, I feel really bad because I said to her, I'm not going to speak Thai or Lao anymore because I'm getting picked on at school. I'm just going to strictly speak English and that's it. And I think that's really screwed me over as a kid because I said to her, like, I'm not going to speak this language anymore because I want to be an Australian person.
Yeah.
And then I go to Thailand when I'm 12, and then I'm like, uh-oh. I don't know how to speak this language very well. I can understand it.
Yeah.
I can form sentences in my head, but when it comes out of my mouth, it's like vomit to them. and then I'm getting picked on by my uncles and my aunties
for not being able to speak Thai.
Not being able to speak Thai properly, and I'm like, I don't even know where I belong. Like I belong in a temple because of my Buddhist upbringing, and I'm so confused because I don't fit in at home in Australia, but I don't fit in at home in Thailand or Laos because I'm getting picked on because I'm taller than everyone. I'm slightly larger than everyone. I'm not white.
You don't look Asian. I don't look Shanghainese at all.
I'm not a white Asian, and I don't want to buy whitening products or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's just so hard because I was just throughout high school, I had this huge identity crisis because I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
And then again with the whole repressed emotional thing, I don't know what I'm feeling. And I'm like, so that's why I'm just like, well, games and study and just do well in school.
You're like, look, we're not going to think about it anymore.
We're just going to compartmentalize this side of my life.
I like how we've had completely opposite reactions because you've just gone like, and there's nothing that can be done about that. Whereas I'm like, look here, everyone.
I'm going to rage
You're
against
going to hear about this.
Okay, Michael,
Yes.
like, with your background, like, it must be ultra hard because you're like, guys, my family's been in Australia for so many generations. I'm probably more Australian than, like, half of you people out
Mate,
there.
you're a pack of tourists, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, yeah, it's super weird. It is super strange. And then and then it's almost But what's really weird is when you tell people that that almost in their mind legitimizes your quote unquote legitimizes your quote unquote Australianness to them.
Yeah.
So like, growing up, parents' friends would refer to me as like quote unquote one of the good ones, like because which first of all implies that there are obviously a rarity of good ones because most of them are quote unquote the bad ones, I guess. But like, and I then. Like, and that's because my family's been here for longer. But it's like, no, I had no control over that. You should judge me on the merits of the decisions I've made and what I can, offer you as a person, not the fact that my family's been here for X many generations or years. Like, it doesn't matter at all. Like,
But because you look different, that's the first thing that people react against, right?
Yeah, and like, I want to be really clear. Like, I was mostly very, very lucky and bullied as a kid, but mostly very lucky in my growing up in this country is very, I think we're all very grateful for that.
Yeah.
But the flip side to looking different to everyone else is that, you're gonna get some looks. I've talked about this before, but like catching a train in Australia when you're not white, it's like a fucking risky thing to do, man. People like, when I used to catch the train from like Sutherland into the city.
Leaving the house on Australia Day, if you're not white, big deal.
Yeah,
big deal.
When I was catching the train from Sutherland as a kid into the city, people like frequently, old drunks would tell me to go back to where I came from. I used to work at a bottle shop. A guy once told me he was a drunk dude, but I was working in a bottle shop for a long time. He said to me, I'd rather shoot you than shake your hand. And I was like, well, I wasn't like gonna shake your hand. Like, I
wasn't on offer, mate.
This was a financial transaction. I've never. I don't know if I've ever been. I've been beaten up a couple of times. I don't have any reason to think that was racially motivated. But I separate to that, the little things, right? Like people saying, yeah, what are you doing? Or when you walk into a room and everyone stops laughing about a joke and you immediately know what they were fucking joking about. Yeah. And the reason they stop laughing is because you're there now and they don't feel like, like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And again, these are tiny things, tiny things. So that you think to yourself every day, you're like, oh no, I'll just get over it. Or, oh no, I'll just move along. But then over 30 years, and maybe that stuff starts to add up. Maybe and maybe that's one of the many reasons to have these crazy neuroticisms. Who knows? Like,
But that's the thing. Like, I never used to think a lot about this stuff until like my mid to late 20s. Like, I used to grow up, be in high school, and be like, yeah, I don't really care. I haven't really experienced racism other than shitty things that kids would say to each other, which is normal. I personally haven't. I've been very lucky. I haven't really experienced that much racism.
Where did you grow up in Sydney?
I grew up in the North Shore.
Right, so is that...
But I was very, like, unobservant on those things, okay? And I went to a very Asian high school. Like, I went to a selective school. Like, I went to North Sydney Girls, which was, like, 80% Asian. and so, like, we didn't have any issues. Like, it was all, aspirational Asians who wanted to be white. Well, not everyone, but, a large majority. So that was fine. I didn't experience racism. Like, my parents experienced racism, when they bought the fish and chip shop. Like, occasionally, drunk guys would, like, come in and yell like, "Do you guys sell fried rice?" Ha 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 ha, and then walk off.
So clever,
and that's the thing. Like,
that's like a thing that some fish and chip shops do sell, though.
They do,
but they weren't asking because they wanted to purchase.
No, but what I mean is like that guy's question's dumb.
It's like, yes,
or like, I mean,
get him.
When Asian families are really loud in public, and you have like white people just roll their eyes.
Yeah, it's like those uncouth Asians.
And you're like the person going, "Oh God, I don't know whether to be embarrassed or to be like really pissed off."
Angry every time. Angry every time. Come at me, brods.
Rad's got it.
But
okay.
like for me, I'm just gonna.
No, yeah, you go.
For me, because my name is not typical, so my full name is Angharad.
Yeah.
I get a lot of real creepy. It's always creepy white males between like 40 and 60 that will be like, "Oh, so where's your name from?" and stuff like that, and I'm like, "It's Welsh," and they're like, "You're trying to trick me." I've literally had people say that to me, and I'm like, "No, it's Welsh," and they're like, you're not Welsh. And I'm like, no. But how many people's names are actually of the descent that they are? And then I get people being like, oh, is your name Thai? And like they think they're really worldly for trying to guess incorrect. Like, it's the whitest name. Well, Wales is the whitest place in the world. I have the whitest name. But yeah, they just, I don't know. It's just everything comes through the filter of how you look.
Okay, so we have to move on. I mean, we could do a whole other 10 podcasts about our childhoods and family stories. So getting into the media. We're on the media. We all work in the media. We work in this brilliant institution called the ABC.
Can't get more bloody Aussie than that.
Hey, Australian broadcasting.
How disappointed were your Asian parents that you chose a career in the media?
Ooh.
I think my parents were just happy I went to uni, and they no, legitimately, I think they were just like, oh, thank God we managed to push her through uni, and good. So that's the best we can do.
How many older siblings do you have?
Two.
And
they are both much higher achievers than I am. Well, actually, no. No, they were. Now I think I'm doing pretty well. Now I think I'm climbing up that totem pole. But so I think they were just happy that I did uni and that I did well in uni and I enjoyed it. And so I think they've just come to the realization that, oh, thank God she has a full-time job.
Yeah.
Because it could have gone very differently for me, I think.
Because you weren't good enough at maths, right?
I was very bad at maths, but I wanted to be a musician.
So they're just happy that you didn't become a musician.
Exactly.
You just gave them
I barely
an out. All right. Well, you've got time.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that one. Yeah. Found musicians. That's another one. Sanita.
My father was disappointed.
What did they want you to do? What did
they wanted me to have a doctorate, or be some sort of professor or something, wear some sort of white lab coat of some sort.
Yeah.
This is.
I love that. Just get a PhD and wear a lab coat.
I don't give a shit what in what.
I know.
Do it.
This is what they told me when I was in year 5, and I'm like, I don't even know what I want to do. I can play the clarinet. And I can draw pretty well.
Clarinet?
I can.
Can you bring your clarinet in one day?
Oh, I don't have one. I don't have my one. But I had a broken clarinet and I made it work. I was I'm sure you kid. I can play a clarinet.
A broken one, yeah.
Yeah, and so when I got into high school, they just were just do really, really well, So I was like, okay. And then when I chose more artsy subjects for my electives, they're my dad especially is just
Oh,
It's
that Asian disappointment when they don't outwardly say that they are disappointed in you, but they are.
Are you sure you want to be an artist?
There's no money in that. Sure. What job are you going to do? Yeah. What's your life going to look like?
I guess like you said, I guess they were happy that I went to uni, but then it's
they could have been happy.
Where's the job? It's but. This is real world, and I have to just sort of struggle to find my way until or find myself, and until I really know, until I know what I'm really good at and what not. So when I got this job, of course they were happy, but they don't care what I do. They don't care the creative input that I can put in or help with you guys.
Is it stable? Do you have annual leave, and how much?
They're just
what's your super?
Yeah, pretty much. They just so how much do you earn? Can you pay these bills? Can you start providing for me now? It's
are you going to be able to take care of me?
I was on TV. In the back of my head. I was on TV.
No one cares.
My life is cool, Mom.
Yeah. Michael, both your parents are doctors. Oh man, they must be disappointed.
Yeah. Man, they are, all things considered, they are remarkably supportive. I mean... when you guys were growing up, was marks at school kind of the most important thing?
Yeah, I have to say, life skills were important. Becoming a good person was really important to my parents. They made sure that I wasn't a little shit or I wasn't too spoiled. Yeah. But and they weren't ever you have to be number one at maths, but they were you have to be at least above average or in the top third or wherever you are.
They do the thing where they're but you're not reaching your potential. I know that you can be doing better. I don't care what everyone else is doing. I know that you can be doing better.
But that's coming from immigrant parents, and I think not just Asian, but any immigrant parent, when you come to a new country without language skills, without connections, without anything, education is the only way for your child to get into society. That's the only way.
Well, certainly growing up, my parents are deeply religious, but they and we went to church, Sunday school, that kind of stuff. But growing up, even though they are deeply religious, the moral stuff they were trying to teach me or whatever was, I think even that was outweighed by the high achieving, do well in school, study hard, etc. stuff. When I dropped out of my fifth university degree.
Oh my gosh! How did they not murder
To
you?
tell mum and dad that I was going to do stand-up comedy.
Because you dropped out of med, right?
I dropped out of a lot of things.
Which
Look, I
was
dropped-
med? Which one was med? That was the first one. Okay.
But that was fraught from day one. Like I wasn't smart enough to keep. Like other people really wanted it. They were working real hard. I mean, look. This is not a woe story. I was, very lucky, very privileged. I totally accept that. But I was not cut out for it.
Yeah.
When I dropped out of my fifth or sixth university, like I dropped out a lot of stuff, and I said to mum and dad, like, don't. And this is around the time I'd also was playing a lot of StarCraft and was thinking about moving to Korea. And so there was a conversation I had with my dad where I was like, Dad, look, don't worry if stand-up comedy doesn't work out. I got a backup plan. I can move to Korea and play StarCraft.
I've thought about this.
Don't worry. Look,
Got it
I'm real
sorted.
good. I'm real good.
Good, man.
One of the best in the country. My APMs are sick. And so for them...
Come look at my ladder.
It's weird. I mean, the first couple of years of me doing comedy, they were like, of course they were terrified. Stand-up comedy's not a job. Even if your parents were like overachieving, weirdos, that they would think that they would be terrified. Anyone's child who comes like, I want to do stand-up comedy. Like, well, that's not a thing you can do. It's not.
You could be a normal, like, white parent, and that would be terrifying.
Yeah, quote unquote normal, quote unquote white. Yeah, but like I mean, and what compounded that was I was terrible for the first couple of years. Like I've always
For
been
the first couple of years.
Yeah, I always do still to this day.
Yeah.
But I always thought I always felt funny, and my friends always thought I was funny. But then stand up is like a really hard thing to be good at. Like you can't. I mean, there's like, 1 in 100 people who just rock up and they're like, oh, I'm naturally funny. And that's good on them. But for me, I started and I was like, the things I find funny, no one else finds funny. What is this, But, and so it wasn't until maybe like, when I quit my job at the bottle shop and wasn't working anymore, I was like, I'm going to do this full time, that my parents were like, all right, well, he's not going to starve. He's going to be fine. And then now trying to explain to my parents that I like, my jobs are now, I go on stage, talk about my dick, right? That's basically stand-up comedy. I play video games and talk about esports for Good Game. I play, sweet bangers on Triple J. Like, trying to explain that to your parents so you can get paid to do that is... It's my... Like,
they don't understand.
They're supportive, but they don't understand. Like, my parents have no idea what I do.
Yeah.
exactly.
Like, in television. But they're kind of supportive in their own way.
But Lin, when are you going to be on the screen?
But I was on the screen, but I was too fat, according to my mother. Yeah. But Michael, you had a great bit about your dad and interviewing your dad for radio and your comedy set.
So, I mean, I think this kind of plays into quote-unquote Asian stereotype parent stuff. I work at a radio station called Triple J, and we do this thing called... we do this thing where we take turns getting our parents or people who aren't necessarily in the demographic to, like, review the album of the week. And so a couple of weeks ago, it was my turn to do this. I got my dad to do it. And I was a bit nervous because my dad's like, he's a real funny guy, and I wasn't sure how I was going to go, right? We had to pre-record it as well because Dad wasn't available in the morning we were going to play it. And so my dad listens to the Luca Brasi album, and he I know, how hilarious. Who would have thought he would like new rock? Anyway, so my dad listens to this album, and he kind of writes a few jokes about it, and we call him up, we're doing it over the phone, and he's like actually really funny, and he's really charming, and it's like he says some real smart stuff about it, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. Like, I was really proud of my dad because I didn't think he was going to nail it like that, and he did. And I was like, that's so cool. And at the end of the conversation, I was like, oh, thanks, Dad. Love you. That was so good. See ya. And then my dad goes, thank you. And hangs up the phone. I'm sitting there in this studio. It's me, Nazim Hussain, and our producer, Jono, right? And we're just sitting there and listening to this. Beep, beep. I just say to the microphone, Jono, you can press stop now.
The words "I love you" they just don't mean anything to Asians.
No, I don't think my parents have ever said "I love you." I know they love me deeply.
Yeah,
they support me
don't say
deeply.
it.
But
The sacrifices are made. It's an action
absolutely,
thing. But
yeah.
saying it almost seems like a weakness, right?
Absolutely,
Yes.
It's
My
almost like,
parents
well, I shouldn't have to say it. Your parents tell you they love
Yeah,
you?
all the time.
Oh,
My mum will say... My mum says...
But my mum often says it exasperately. She'll be like, I love you, but can you just...
Oh, the I love you butt.
There was always
certainly.
a butt there.
Yeah. The I love you butt comes out all the time in the Hing house. I'll tell you what.
yeah.
Well,
I love you, but just settle.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, I love you, but
Yeah. Oh, look, there's another podcast in Asian mothers.
Or
Oh yeah, for sure.
the very quickly, the other I love you I will occasionally get from my parents is the qualified I love you to prove that they love us all equally as children. No, we love you all equally. Like,
Yes.
you could just say you love us. You don't need to. It's not a competition, Mum.
I don't think I ever got that.
I mean, I've gone through my career a little bit in previous podcasts, but I've literally wanted to work in film and TV since I was 7, right? I've literally told my parents, their friends, anyone who was around me
Living the
since like the
dream.
age of 7 that I wanted to do that. And they would humour me until the end of high school.
They're like,
when you had to, make
still
your
going
uni
for it.
choices. And my parents were slightly petrified that they were like, we thought this was just a phase. And I was like, a phase since I was 7? Like, that's not a phase. That's like a life
It's funny
ambition.
how parents are like that. They're like,
And-
it's just a phase because I don't want it.
My parents wanted me to study commerce law and, go into this big corporate thing.
You did a proper uni degree, didn't you?
I did. I as I said
She
to people,
did law.
Yep.
I have a combined degree in communications law. I have a honours in law.
Yep. Now you're doing this bullshit.
And now I direct kids television.
great.
Yeah, that's great. But it was really interesting. Earlier this year, I got an email from this kid from a very, very good selective high school in Sydney who is basically like, my parents want me to be a doctor. The usual Asian thing, like, be a doctor.
Yeah.
Why? We don't know. It's a stable job. We think it's a stable job. Is it
It's
really?
the prestige.
Yeah, but he's like, my parents want me to do medicine, but I'm really into IT. And I'm like, do IT, man. IT's a great career. If
Yeah.
you love IT, if you're passionate about that side of it, do it.
Yeah.
And I wrote this really, really long email, and I said to him, like, look, this is coming from a person who's like 30, and I've probably gone through a lot of issues and kind of worked out a lot of stuff that you will have to work out in the next 12 years of your life. But just from my perspective, you will never ever make your parents 100% happy. That just like once you make them happy on one level, you will have to make them happy. You will have to marry the right girl. You will have to have the right
man.
kids. You have to buy the
Don't
right
start talking
house.
about partners. My goodness.
You just can't make your parents happy. That goalpost will keep moving. So, like, my advice to him was just like, you
the bar
just
low.
have to not set the bar low.
Set the bar.
but-
Thank God you're not a drug addict.
Yeah, man.
but it's more like
Gotta toy with that stuff so they get the
Yeah.
fear in it.
yeah, exactly.
the earlier you
Don't do that.
realize,
Obviously, that's a joke. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
the earlier that you realize that you will never hit that high bar is better. Like, you will have a much happier uni life, and you'll have a much happier 20s than a lot of people. Anyway, moving on quickly. Okay, so here are some percentages from the 2011 census. So at the moment, about 8% of the population in Australia are were born in Asia or from an Asian heritage, and the number goes up to 19/20% in Sydney and Melbourne. So this goes to, I guess, representation in the Australian media, right? I think Good Game is doing great.
Yeah.
4 of us out of like 20. We're like hitting those percentages, man.
Now, wait, how many on-screen presenters do we have? We've got Hex, Badger, Goose,
We have Sick,
Nick,
Darren.
Darren,
Yeah,
me. That's 6.
Darren's a robot though. So.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, we're
mean, we're
certainly-
kind of-
we're
we're-
over-representing robots, frankly.
To be honest, like out of the entire ABC,
1 in 5's pretty good, yeah.
out of the entire ABC, we are probably the most ethnically diverse in terms of content makers.
Who else is...
Or other than the Indigenous unit, they don't count because they're actually
all
like
are.
Yeah, because they're doing specific... Yeah, they're doing
Yeah.
specific content for a
Yeah.
specific racial ethnic community.
But like Good Game is like just hitting the mark, guys. The rest of the ABC probably not as much.
These
can-
these
but
views are the
we
views
can
of
still
Lin
always do
Jie.
better.
These are my
The
views.
of
They are not the
ABC.
views of the ABC. Yeah, I'm not afraid to call people out on that because I think it's funny. I was in a meeting the other day where basically it was said that the majority of the ABC were happy with the diversity in the ABC.
Oh yeah,
Which is
that's
like,
right.
no, but look, diversity is like, gender and age and everything else. But in terms of ethnic diversity,
Weren't you the only ethnic in that room?
I was the only ethnic in that room. And I said to Rad and Sanita, and I was like, you guys should have come into that meeting because at least we would have upped the ethnic quote in that meeting. And I was like,
would
the
have
only
audibly
ethnic.
laughed when they said that. I would have.
Like basically, Pete
then
and I
gotten
looked at
fired.
each other. Pete looked at me because he knew I was like, what? No.
But yeah, I mean, it's
hard. It is
frustrating.
so
It's
hard.
frustrating. I mean, I should say as well, the ABC is doing a lot better than other places in Australia in terms of media representation. Like, and I should say as well.
So we should be happy with mediocrity? Is that what you're saying, Mike?
Not at all. But I've not been told by anyone at the ABC that quote unquote broad Australia won't get me or that middle Australia won't get me. I've not been told by anyone at the ABC that quote unquote I don't have the right look for a thing. For all the problems the ABC does have, they at least mask it behind an amount of political correctness that certain commercial stations have absolutely no qualms about.
To be honest, like ABC and obviously SBS are leaders in the Australian media.
But you got to think as well. Like, it wasn't 15 years ago. Bullpit was on television, a show about a racist old white man where all the jokes were like, nah, Asians. That's a thing that was. It was a short-lived sitcom on Channel 9 called Bullpit.
Yeah, I don't think I watched that.
Most of the jokes were about how his last name kind of sounds like bullshit, and the ones that weren't were deeply racist. But you think that things are changing for the better, but you got to think like we've come a long way just because of the fact that but it's not because we've come a long way because we've come so far. We've come a long way because we started so far behind, and it's within the last decade. Like now, really shitty things are on TV right now.
It's all the cooking, Michael. It's actually the cooking.
The cooking's helping. But there was a comedy show in the last couple of years where one of the main characters did blackface.
Yep.
Why
is blackface still happening?
That's like a comedy show. There was like a co-production between Australian comedy and American.
And they're like, let's put this down. Like, there's so many. Having worked in television, I know there's so many layers that everything has to go through.
Exactly. So many
for something to go to.
It would have been like at least 20 people would have had to say yes to that.
This script looks fine. You got to whack over an enemy a rapper and you'll black up for it. TikTok. That's a thing that happened within the last couple of years in Australian television, And people were fine with it. That show went overseas and people were like, we'll
they're like, that's terrible. And then we're like, no, but it's fine. And we're like, no.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what I mean. Like, the fact that when I was growing up, Mahatma Coat was on the footy show,
Yeah.
And,
I remember that.
A guy dressed up in brownface pretending to be a quote-unquote, Indian. And
I laughed at that because you're a kid. You do. And because
you don't know any better,
Well, because you were raised in this kind of white culture that you think it's funny.
You think difference is funny.
I still have friends now, Asian friends now, who think it's funny to put on fob voice and, make fun of being Asian to their white friends. And then because they do that, their white friends think it's okay to do it too. And it just proliferates the problem. They don't see
I should probably stop doing that in the office, right?
Well, I only think you should stop doing that because I don't think certain people get it.
All right.
But I don't think it's a problem when it's self-reflexive, but when it's ignorant, it's a problem. And I feel like it's done in ignorance.
Yeah, also you got to say that there are things you can say to your friends that are obviously real fucked up, but in a context of friendship and love, it's totally fine. You have personal in-jokes with people, and in this office, everyone kind of gets it, but it's when people take a gamble and they're like, you're gonna like this. We don't know each other very well at all.
Yeah.
That is not okay.
A lot of people are going to say, look, well, only 8% of Australia are Asians. That's less than 1 in 10, either on screen or behind the screen. When you really look at the numbers, maybe we're not doing that bad, but do you guys think it's more than that? It's for me, one particular point is the shift away from tokenism, right? It's not just enough to have that one token ethnic in your office or on your show. It has to be more than that.
It's key that I'm not presenting the Asian report on Good Game,
we can do that if you want,
Michael Hing. I'm the Asian reporter.
Could you still get that outfit from your school?
I probably wouldn't fit.
We should have done it for Chinese New Year this year, Michael.
Hashtag Asians in gaming.
One big thing for me is the barriers that are put up for people, ethnic people who want to enter certain roles. So it's not just about tokenism, and it's not just about, okay, but we have our 1 in 8 or our 1 in 10 or whatever, so it's fine. It's about the idea that it is a lot harder for people to accept certain people in roles if they don't see them as being viable for that role already.
Oh, man.
So it's that
Absolutely.
idea that...
Well, that's what representation is all about, right?
Precisely. And this brings us to our next point. Representation matters. And if you don't think representation matters, then that is likely because you are already well represented.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. again, I come to this point of I didn't really think about this or question this growing up because I was kind of naive and stubborn enough to think that I would make it. It's like, I'll be the next Scorsese. I'll be Spielberg. It doesn't matter they're like white people, like white men. Like, I'll totally, be
Rich
the
white
next
men from
director
America.
of James Bond. But the older you get, the more you realize these institutional barriers, right? Because you don't see anyone in the roles that you aspire to.
Absolutely.
Like, you're like, I'd love to be a Hollywood director one day. And it's like 0.02% of Hollywood directors are ethnic females. Like, I am fucked.
Yeah.
Like, it ain't happening.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, do you want to...
I was going to say, I just didn't grow up with any role models.
Yeah.
It was like, who do I look up to?
And that's weird and that's scary as well. Like, you don't realize what an impact that has on you until you get a bit older and you look back and hindsight's 2020 and you go, that kind of sucks. Like, that's not fun. And for me, like, I wanted to be a musician ever since I was like 8 years old. And I, started learning guitar and I would learn to sing and play and stuff. And all of my role models were female because I had that instinct in me enough to be like, they are more like me. Like, I aspire to be like them. But there are no Asian singers. Like,
or just an Asian Australian.
Yeah.
Who understands that what we've been through. Just like a role model like that.
Demi Im,
I know, I was going to say, we have Dami Im now. And I don't really like her music, but I love her as a concept just because it's like, okay, finally there's like a Western Asian singer.
But it goes back to all the barriers, with our parents, right? Because our parents didn't see any role models. They didn't see Asians on TV. They didn't see any Asians.
Apart from Lin Chin.
Yeah, but she was on SBS. But so it was like, okay, you could be a newsreader on SBS if you wanted to aspire on television or in the media. And so growing up, it was like, are you sure you really want to do this? Like, we don't see anyone else who looks like you doing this.
Country,
like, we don't think this is possible. And that's the issue with representation, because if you don't see it happening, then everyone around you, like, you might not think it, but everyone around you thinks it.
Yeah.
And there's also a really great talk that Natalie Tran or Community Channel did about this, about Asians in the media. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend you go look it up. But she talks about the fact that when you are so underrepresented, you start to overly criticize every representation that vaguely covers you as well.
Oh, man.
And so instead of going, I think that's a good piece of media, it has problems, but I like it for these reasons and I dislike these things, like we do with everything else, like normal humans, when it's got an Asian face to it, and I'm so guilty of this as well, when it's got an Asian face to it, I'm immediately like, they should have done that better. This should have been better.
Yeah, you're super skeptical about it because you feel like there's so few representations of you that each one matters so much. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, this is our only shot. It has to be great. And if it's not, it's heartbreaking.
Or like that person has to speak for the rest of the Asians,
exactly.
right?
They have to do so much better. They have to be more human than human. And
I mean, the reverse of that is the quote unquote commercial like imperative is that Middle Australia won't get it or whatever. We can't have an Asian male lead or an Asian female lead because Middle Australia won't get it or whatever. As though like white people won't be able to watch it and like relate to someone who doesn't look exactly like I've been doing it for fucking years.
Just like all of us have to relate to white people.
I mean, it's the whole thing. Like I've talked about this before, but like the whole thing with video games. Whenever a video game comes out and it doesn't have like a straight white male lead, all the people on the internet tweet and they're like, "What? I can't relate to this. I can't relate to this."
Welcome to the world of everyone who's different.
But also, like, you just spent literally 1,000 hours playing a troll in World of Warcraft. Like, how is that more relatable to you than you pretending to be a woman or a person of color or whatever? Like,
well, a troll. A troll, Michael.
Literally a troll.
Yeah. And the other problem that I have with representations of Asians in media is how they are represented sexually. Because the Asian is seen as like either hypersexual for the purposes of other people's pleasure, or they are seen as asexual.
Oh, man.
And those are the only two, like, there's no
and you can
That's my Buddhist upbringing.
But you can pretty easily split that between men and women as well, right?
Yeah.
It's like ladies
Ladies
Asian
are
ladies
there
and
for
It's like your
sexual
Orientalism.
pleasure.
it's like you do a Google search for like white women, right? And you see like, oh, she might be like holding a clipboard or in an office or whatever. You do a Google image search for Asian women.
I will not do that image
That is
search.
that some
Make sure you have
hectic
like
Google image.
safe search on when you do it.
That's what I mean. Like,
and the
immediately
Asian
you
male
understand
is
that, right?
sexless.
Yeah.
The Asian male is like, he's the friend, he's rarely the love interest, or he's the love interest who pines after the girl that he cannot get because she
Goofy
doesn't find
dude.
him in time.
He's a goofy dude.
Exactly.
There's a great meme like putting John Cho on like every rom-com poster.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to quickly move to whitewashing. I know, Rad, you have a lot to say about whitewashing. Okay. What is whitewashing?
Do you want me to...
In literal terms, in Thailand, it's bleaching products for skin.
In a lot of Asian countries, like in a lot of the South Asian countries, like skin bleaching is
Even in
very
India?
popular because
Even
the whiter you are,
Jamaica.
I mean, this goes to the fucked upness of like being an aspirational white person, right? It's like you want to bleach your skin so you can look whiter.
Yeah.
And like, speaking of media representation in those countries, they all are very, very, very pale. They all have very big eyes and sharp noses. You don't see any sort of like Thai person who looks like they're from the backwoods of Thailand, like myself. You know, in my family, we've got flatter noses, you know, and bigger faces and everything, but they're just so petite, and it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's the other thing.
Know.
The petite Asian.
Yeah.
Like, Asians are so small and just so cute, and I can just fit you in my pocket. I'm like, I don't want to go in your pocket. Leave me out of this. Like, it's just, Okay, whitewashing though.
Yeah.
You know, a pre-existing text like a comic book or a novel or something, and one of the characters isn't white, but when they make a movie of it or make a TV series of it, they cast a white actor in that, and they do one of two things: they either ignore the fact this person was originally intended to be a person of color, or they just do a bit of weirdly racist makeup. Give it a bloody crack, you know.
Yeah,
it happens. It's been happening
Just take
for
those eyes
years,
back.
and now it happens even more because Hollywood and television programs are getting source material from anime, from manga, etc., and then they're just recasting, for example, Scarlett Johansson or Tilda Swinton in these things, you know.
And they say that they justify it in a couple of ways by saying things like, it just wouldn't be economically viable to have an ethnic face in this, or people wouldn't identify with it, or we just couldn't find an Asian actress. They're just not out there. They just don't exist. And that is part of the problem as well, because say you're interested in acting, if you know that there's not many roles for you, like for how you look, you're going to be discouraged. You're going to be like, well, maybe I should have a backup, and maybe I should put more time into my backup instead of more time into my passion. That's really sad. That's really, really sad. And it's not good, and it's not fair, and it doesn't breed good media, and it doesn't breed healthy people.
No, obviously there's a lot of outcry to this, and I don't want to play devil's advocate here, but I was reading an article saying, a bunch of journalists asked people in Japan whether, they were pissed off that Scarlett Johansson got cast in Ghost in the Shell. Was that it? And they were like, well, we don't really care. That's what Hollywood does. But I hate the fact that that's what Hollywood does is the phrase, and that's a go-to phrase for a lot of things. It's like, but that's what happens. That's okay. And it's like, okay, so we should just stay in the status quo and not improve on anything and accept that this is right.
This is all about progression. This is all about saying, no, that's not good enough, and we're not going to be doing that anymore. We're not going to go, okay, yeah, like that's just the way things are. And it's maybe not that bad, because it is that bad. It does affect people's lives, and you're like, but it's just media, it's just movies, it's just TV. How much time do you spend consuming this media?
Yeah, exactly.
How much of your life is it, and how much do you feel that it informs your human experience? Because if you're anything like me, you spend more time consuming media than you do almost any other form of entertainment or hobby. And the way that it informs the human experience is insane. And if we are not consuming things that show us diversity and show us these are different narratives that exist and that you can relate to, then you start to really get in your own head, and you start to really be like, if I am this is the only thing that I can be within that. This is the only way that exists.
I think the most important thing is to normalize things.
Yeah,
is normalization.
absolutely.
Is that this is just it. This is what it should be like. Yeah. It shouldn't be, we need to add a certain quota or a percentage. It's no, fucking normalize it so it's like real life
we
or something.
Have to
or
question it.
Yeah, exactly.
Unremarkable.
Why is there an Asian lead?
Yeah.
And you don't have to ask.
It's the whole thing as well, of like, guys, we have an Asian lead, come watch our thing. It's like, can it just exist, maybe?
Yeah. But not yet. I think I mean, sometimes I feel like lately I'm a little bit of broken record on Twitter and stuff. I'm like, pro-feminist, pro-ethnic and shit.
I'll say it till I lose my voice.
Well, that's good, Rad. I'm really happy for you at your young age. That
You've already been radicalized.
Talk to me in 10 years.
that you feel free and, proper to voice your opinions. But I feel like, if you're not going to talk about it, like, and us being the prime people who are being affected, right? Mm. If we are not the people to talk about it, then who will? Yeah. Then who will, fight for minority voice? And it doesn't matter in terms of ethnicity or gender or, whatever. Mm. If you are the people in question and you're not bringing it up and talking about it, then who is fighting your fight? Because I think a lot of my life, I just kind of took a step back and, my parents were very much like, oh, don't stir the boat, just play nice,
rock
integrate.
The boat. You stir a pot.
Sorry. Hey, English is my third language. I just want to say.
You're very brave.
But it's so good.
Yeah, I know. It's so good, isn't it? But yeah, so I think it's important to talk about and to raise the issue. And I'm usually like the first one who makes a crack at my ethnicity these days because I want it to be at the top of the conversation. I want people to think about it.
It's okay to talk about it. It's good to talk about it.
Exactly, because
you don't learn things by not talking about it.
If you repress it, if you just assimilate and integrate and you think by doing that, everything's going to be hunky-dory and you will just be accepted, it doesn't work like that. Mm. Yeah.
And I want to add on that. This is something that, I know I talk really passionately about it because I'm just a fiery human being, but...
Yes.
Fiery pocket human being.
Yes. But... I love having these conversations if they can be had respectfully. I love having respectful conversations about things that we don't necessarily understand, and I love hearing from other people's perspectives. So if you want to talk to me about this more, feel free. I am on Twitter all the time.
He's going to be getting messages like, why are you so Asian?
Just sliding into your DM.
Oh, don't say that. Feel free because it's good to be informed about this, and it's good to understand, this is part of being in media. It's being able to hear other perspectives and being able to come to an understanding about something that you previously would not necessarily have an experience of. And if we aren't putting those experiences out there, how can you learn from them? Mm. Yeah. So talk about it.
All right, I just want to say, be respectful. I just want to say, I'm really, really glad that all of you guys are in the office and that none of us are the token Asian and that we can all support each other.
We're all so different.
You were before.
I was like the token Asian and the token woman, for a long time, man. That was, I don't want to say it's difficult because the Good Game office is brilliant, but the issue is people don't get your perspective because you've come from such a different background.
I think the show is better because we have such a diverse group of people making the show.
And someone had the nerve to argue that our show wasn't diverse. And it was just
obviously we can always do more. You can always do more. I think that people always talk about Samantha Bee. They're like, oh, should she have hired so many female writers for a writers show? I'm like, yeah, she should have because the show fucking rules. Yeah, and it's better because she has such a diverse crew of people writing it. That's how you make good stuff. Yeah, which speaks to a broad group of people is by having it written by a team of... Anyway, sorry.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Michael. Okay, everyone, you've got 15 seconds to sum up your arguments before I finish the show.
Nah, I'm just happy to be here.
You're right.
I'm just I'm sweaty now.
I just want my fried rice and fish sauce.
Just get back into the Asian food. Okay. Well, again, we are out of time. We can talk about these issues for hours. Michael, you've built an entire career pulling this stuff apart and making people laugh about it.
Yes.
And we hope we've given you, dear listeners, something to think about as well. And if you've got something to say about the things you heard on this podcast, drop me a line at Algeology or leave a comment on SoundCloud and Facebook. As always, you can subscribe and listen on iTunes. Till next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.